hello, welcome to the channel in sign language. Or it was just me throwing fingers around. This is part 4, Farmers to Raiders, the mysterious origin of the Vikings. And let's start the video in 6,014, 6,013, 6,012.
The sagas also tell us that the trips were exploratory, but that if they found the right place, they would settle and establish a colony there. A lot of artifacts found at the Norse site indicate that boats were repaired there. They had arrived in their large vessels, but had smaller dinghies in tow. We know that the blacksmith was busy making new rivets to replace corroded ones and to attach new planks to the hull. Close to the boat repair site, archaeologists found lumps of corroded iron. Using X-ray photography revealed the old rivets inside.
That's cool.
But one of the most striking results from excavations is the neutron analysis of jasper stone used for making fire. Jasper, found in the bedrock in Greenland, Iceland, and North America, was tested and compared to the stones found at the ruins in Newfoundland. The stones in the largest building came from Greenland, suggesting that this was the house of Leif Erikson, who had come from there. Fire strikers in the next house originate from Iceland, fitting in well with the saga's description of Eriksson's companions coming from Iceland. Butternuts found at the site indicate that the explorers had been to the inner parts of the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which was the nearest place to find these nuts. And the wild grapes, which produced the much sought-after wine, came from warmer climes. From the tip of Newfoundland, the Norse must have launched journeys to other sites.
It's not very likely that so ambitious.
When they, in the last episode, they called this, I already forgot it. Something about wine. And I was just expecting there was a lot of grapes. But then I started thinking you could make wine out of virtually anything. So there could have been, pears and apples or, whatever you wanted to make, a kind of wine out of. So when I saw grapes, it kind of made sense. If you missed the last episode, then this means absolutely nothing to you. Apologies.
People, as they were, would have been content to stay at a very cold place in Newfoundland or in the northern places where they had sea ice half of the year.
Icelandic writer Paul Berithorsson's theories have sparked a debate, especially his claim that the Norse sailed to present-day New York. None of this has been substantiated in archaeological discoveries.
We know
I've heard that they've sailed down, but that's just, I think that's kind of people wanting it to be true, maybe more than it is.
there was an important Norse settlement in northern Newfoundland. And I have a very hard time to see that they would continue all the way south to New York. Already in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, you get the most wonderful resources to a Norseman. Why would anybody bother to go further?
Sailing along Newfoundland and Nova Scotia's coasts is still tough work today. A millennium after Leif Erikson's original voyage, Gunnar Moral Egertsson decided to sail the same distance from Iceland to Greenland and to North America. Smaller replica ships joined him along the Newfoundland coast to commemorate the Vikings' original journey. But only the bigger boats could have sailed farther, and as a sailor, Gunnar is convinced he knows the mindset that was Leif Eriksson's and his followers. Their thinking is no different than his own today.
We are always trying to get further and further. That's in the nature of man. For a Viking on a Viking ship to sail to Lanzometos, Newfoundland, and stop there would be a really stupid thing to do. I think they were at least down to New York. I think they were down to Florida, maybe into Mexico.
I disagree with that. I don't think they got that far. But there's no proof that says they don't.
When Gunnar sails into New York Harbor, he is certain that the sagas have accurately described this as one of the places the Norse explorers traveled to. Paul Berithorsen is of the same opinion.
The harbor of New York is, I think, what they called home, which means sea lagoon, actually, which it is. And they told about a river flowing from the north. That's the Hudson River.
You can't land at New York Harbor. And you see the buildings there, civilization already exists. Joking.
He and his company sailed into the lagoon and called the land Hu. There they found fields of self-sown wheat and vines growing on the hills. They dug trenches along the high water mark, and when the tide ebbed, there were holy fish in them.
Paul Berithorsen's conclusion is that the settlement of Hop could have been situated at present-day Brooklyn, and that the fish they found was the winter flounder. The sagas tell us about the Norse meeting Native Americans. The Norse speak in derogatory terms of the natives, calling them Skrælings.
One of the passages in the sagas which is hard to understand initially was why the Skrælings, the Native Americans, went from happily trading with the Norse one day, accepting strips of red cloth and buckets full of milk for furs, and then the next day they come back angry and they don't even talk, they just start fighting. And of course today we know what happened. The Skrælings went home and drank the milk. Coming from a hunting and gathering population, they were lactose intolerant. Most of them couldn't digest the milk and reacted to it as though they'd been poisoned. And I'm sure they assumed that they were and came back looking for revenge the day after. So I think that milk is certainly part of the reason why Skræling and Norsemen got along badly in North America.
Interesting.
There would be no peaceful coexistence with the Native Americans. The Norse had no superior weapons and knew that they were losing the battle.
It's very easy to tell from the sagas that the Norse were fearful of the Aboriginal people already in North America. And why shouldn't they be? I mean, they were outnumbered by the thousands.
Karlsefni and his men had realized by now that although the land was excellent, they could never live there in safety or freedom from fear because of the native inhabitants. So they made ready to leave the place and return home.
But perhaps the attempt to settle a new land was ill-fated from the beginning.
You can't start a new settlement with just a couple of handful of people. You need hundreds, and they didn't have hundreds to spare.
The attempt to stay in North
I would guess they would have just been exploring then to see what lands were available for them to come back to.
America went on for possibly as much as 40 years, and even though the sagas only mention 5 different trips, we have reasons to believe that many more ships sailed along these coasts. On returning to Greenland, these people soon faced a new problem. The climate had turned for the worse, and farming became increasingly difficult. The climate theory to explain the Norse demise in Greenland has been the accepted fact for a long time, but scientists are starting to challenge this theory, pointing more at ecological and socio-economic factors that added to the existing climatical problems. Danish scientist Naja Mikkelsen is looking for new evidence.
There are many theories why the Norse disappeared from Greenland. One of them is that they actually caused heavy erosion in the area by overgrazing and by cultivating the landscape, making grass for their livestock and cattle. And what we want to do is we want to see whether we can prove that theory or disprove it by finding heavy sand deposits and soil erosion in this area.
Other evidence comes from the bones left behind in the houses.
We see evidence that the bones really smashed up very finely, and it looks as though they've gone to the trouble of making this bone soup, extracting the last bit of good from the bones. We have in several sites in the western settlement area.
I'm guessing they're getting the bone marrow out?
Dog bones cut, sometimes gnawed, on the uppermost floor layers of the houses. Norse people in Iceland, Greenland, and elsewhere didn't normally eat their dogs, but it looks as though in the final days in these settlements that may very well have happened. So we do have evidence for something really bad happening in the Western settlement at the end.
Wow.
Starvation took its toll. More bodies ended up in the Greenland churchyards, and the people who died far away in Vinland, North America, were also brought back home to Greenland for burial. As Christians, they had to be buried in consecrated earth.
I'm now walking on one of those sites which we think could be a church. On my left hand you have the fence around the churchyard, and on my right the ruin. But to be sure that it actually is a church, we have to excavate. So what do you think of finding anything? As soon as we have found a grave with a skeleton in, we know that people have been buried here, and we are sure that we have found a church.
Interesting.
Back in Copenhagen, archaeologist Jette Arneborg has teamed up with medical doctor Niels Linderup at the Panum Institute, hoping that his analyses can shed light on the Norsemen's final days in Greenland. Using tooth enamel for analyses provides some of the answers.
The oxygen isotope readings from the teeth made it clear that this climate change, which we knew from ice core borings, also directly affected the humans living up there.
The bones also show signs of more infections, and the possibility that people got shorter, perhaps as a result of malnutrition.
Which could indicate that indeed living conditions deteriorate somewhat over the 400-500 years of living in Greenland.
But who or what is to blame for this change to life in Greenland? What about the animals? Did they contribute to the problems of survival? Naja hasn't found the sand deposits she's looking for.
So this seems to indicate that it wasn't the Norse who actually caused any soil erosion, and that the decline of the Norse culture here in Greenland wasn't caused by them overgrazing and destroying the landscape.
But no doubt, the climate became colder, and the fjords were blocked by more ice. The residents couldn't bring timber in from Labrador or Norway, and maintaining their ships was very difficult.
What did happen was the Icelanders and the Greenlanders become increasingly isolated, increasingly dependent upon other people's ships to come to them. And it's sort of a terrible irony. These two initially great seafaring peoples wind up being effectively landlocked by their lack of seagoing ships.
As the Scandinavian kingdoms formed in the 12th and 13th centuries, the Viking Age came to an end in Europe. But the Norse in Greenland continued to live for another 200 years, as they had done for almost half a millennium. And then, suddenly they were gone. Only ruins remained in Greenland. Not a single Norseman.
I don't think we need a catastrophe to explain why the Norse disappeared. With lower population numbers, a slow and orderly emigration over 100 to 200 years could explain why the Norse settlements were abandoned.
The Vikings and the Norse remained Europeans to the bitter end, not opting to live like the Inuit people and survive in an Arctic land. For many of them, the final Viking voyage was back to Iceland, Scandinavia, or other European sites where they would be comfortable and feel at home. But the Vikings had forever made their mark on shipbuilding, maritime navigation, and naval language. The dragon had folded its wings, but history will always remember the people who made the Viking voyages.
Interesting. Oh, the Elephant Man. Well, this is good. I enjoyed it. Sorry, I was looking at my dog. So, I'm going to go ahead and end this here. I hope you appreciated it or liked it. I did. And before we go, I gotta tell you to like and subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, you're gonna find yourself duct taped to a riding lawnmower that's just going on down the road. And it's gonna be stuck. You're gonna be walking behind it while it's going full speed. And then kimono dragons are gonna attack you. And there's gonna be an eagle and dragons. A Loch Ness monster. I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. I'm just saying things. So, we're going to end this video here. Have a good day. Have a good night.